Have governments changed in their basic purpose? It has always been that the business of government is to promote the happiness of the society by punishing and rewarding. I agree. The first duty of government is to see that the people have food, fuel, and clothes. The second, that they have had means of moral and intellectual education. However, as we look at the 20th and 21st centuries, I would add that the role of government in respect to property rights must be emphasized again. It has long been known that the poor have no right to the property of the rich. I wish also to declare that the rich have no right to the property of the poor. Aha! Then in respect to the jurisprudence of natural and civil law, as well as the law of nations, secrecy being an instrument of conspiracy, ought never to be in the system of a regular government.
As we narrow our focus, let's look at the 5 long waves that have occurred over the history of the United States. If we project measurements backward from the 20th century, we find that the industrial and agricultural calculations coincide fairly well until the mid-19th century. Let's begin with the first 3 waves leading up to the Great Depression of the 1930s. The first wave began at the time of the American Revolutionary War and reached its peak during the early decades of the United States. We identify this wave by economic prosperity due to maritime trade, along with the development and proliferation of Eli Whitney's cotton gin. In addition, the development of the steam engine by James Watt and its application to water transportation by Robert Fulton furthered this prosperity. The second wave began throughout the era of good feeling during the 1820s, a period in which Americans were united in purpose. This wave reached its peak a decade before the war between the states. We identify the prosperity in this wave by the acquisition of California from Mexico and the subsequent gold rush of the 1850s. In addition, the development of the steel industry, which enabled the rapid growth of railroads in the East, added more prosperity. The third wave began around 1880, when the United States went to freer silver and gold standards. This wave ended when President Franklin D. Roosevelt took the country off of the gold standard in 1933.
The economic surge of this wave came from a series of events. These included the gold resumption prosperity, completion of and trade along the first transcontinental railroad, corporate mergers, as well as corporate growth, and urban growth of the Roaring Twenties. During this wave, education and engineering led to massive developments in the fields of electricity and chemicals. We also used the math and science of the time to measure economic change.
Yes, the work of science is to substitute facts for appearances and demonstrations for impression. John Maynard Keynes, David Ricardo, and I, English economists all, have just finished a side conversation. We would like to contribute a brief summary for the benefit of moving along the discussion. Keynes has suggested the importance of money flows from it, being a link between the present and the future. He also says the social object of skilled investment should be to defeat the dark forces of time and ignorance that envelop our future. By continuing the process of inflation, a government can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of its citizens. Ricardo tells us, in the same manner, if any nation wasted part of its wealth or lost part of its trade, it could not retain the same quantity of circulating medium which it before possessed. In respect to class divisions, Ricardo says, it is not by the absolute quantity of produce obtained by either class that we can correctly judge the rate of profit, rent, and wages, but by the quantity of labor required to obtain that produce. As for my own views on the subject, I humbly ask Dr. Sayce and his contemporaries to remember that ignorance of the principle of population among the poor serves the interests of the rich by provoking cutthroat competition among laborers, bidding down wages and extending working hours. Consequently, the poor are too exhausted to learn and are trapped in a cycle of ignorance and exhaustion. Education is not compatible with extreme poverty. It is impossible effectually to teach an indigent population. As a result, the poor are disqualified from any but a low grade of intelligent labor. In summary, with every boom and bust, with every crisis within history, tension and conflict between increasingly polarized classes heightens. In recent centuries, we have seen smaller firms being gobbled up by larger ones during every business cycle, as power concentrates in the hands of the few and away from the many.
Let's follow the economic timeline from 1787 into the 1930s. In assessment, a few attributes become apparent in all three Condontrief waves. During each one, the number of prosperous years exceeds the not so prosperous ones. If we count the years of prosperity as those of above trend, the ratio is 2/3 above and 1/3 below trend. The second attribute in the sequence of the fluctuations during major wars and their subsequent recessions, each of the first three waves had a major war, the War of 1812, the war between the states, and the First World War. Each period of prosperity, either during or immediately after a major war, is followed first by a post-war recession, depression, and later by a second one. Also, there are 2 to 3 more post-war recession years than there were years of war-related prosperity. This fact challenges the old adage that war is good for the economy. Also, periods of extended prosperity tend to be more stable than sudden booms and busts. 2 boom-bust cycles occurred back-to-back during the expansionary phase of the second economic wave. The bank credit land boom of 1835 to 37 preceded the banking panic of 1837 with after effects that lasted through 1838. Now, why did this happen? Well, the answer is that President Andrew Jackson won office on the platform of eliminating the national debt.
During his second term as president, he took advantage of a huge real estate bubble that raged in the Western territories. The federal government owned vast tracts of Western land. Jackson sold public lands and used the proceeds in order to pay off the national debt. Unfortunately, this venture resulted in a real estate bubble that led to a banking panic